Hey everybody, this is Jim, and I'm here to build a Technic sailboat. I thought that making a video about this would be a great way to help demonstrate several of the components that come in the Technic system, so that you can see a kind of a visual tutorial on how those parts work and come together. And I thought building the sailboat's probably the best way to demonstrate the functionality of these parts. I have the book in front of me, and first thing I wanted to draw your attention to is on the first page. I mentioned this in my tip column on booster bricks. Um, a lot of these instruction booklets will actually include a picture next to the step of the axle that you need. This little number here in the circle indicates how many studs long that is. And the 1-to-1 just means that this means if you held up the stick next to this, it would be a perfect match. Also, they do the same thing with the beams. If you go to the first page and look down here, they have a number next to it showing how many holes that is. And you can always hold the beam up next to the picture to get the right uh, match. It's funny because when you get started with the Technic set, usually the base of the set, uh, you start to put something together in an assembly and you start to wonder, how is this thing ever going to look like a sailboat? It's really quite interesting. I'm going to walk you guys through it and point out key features of each part as I build it, and we'll go from there. So I'll talk to you shortly. Okay, so now we are here at this stage, and I'm entering into step 4. And basically, what I'm doing here is I'm taking this assembly that I've made from the previous steps, took some pins of different kinds, and put them together. This one is actually 2 pins put together as one. They go together like that, and then they stick in that way. And then when I'm done with that, I just slip this beam over the top of those, and it locks it in. And then I also put a pin in there. So what you end up with is something that looks like this. Then the next couple of steps involve building something that is actually, there's 2 of them, and one of them is an opposite to the other. And so what we do is we'll go ahead and we'll whip those up really quick. And I took these 2 half beams and made them as one, and then pushed the pin through, so now they're like this. And then I can take this long pin, and actually I put it in the wrong way already. There we go. How about like that? Put that through there, like that. And then I got this little tiny axle. Goes in there like that. Then you would take this thing and you could slip it over. How does that go? Oh, I got it backwards. Slip it onto there like that. Now you do the same exact thing, but in opposite fashion to do the other side. I'll throw that together really quick. So we have our 2 half plates together. And then our long pin goes all the way through so that there's parts showing on either side. Very important. And then put our axle in. And then this snaps in onto the other side. So what we start out with is basically the foundation of our boat hull. And as you can see, starting out with something like this, an assembly like this, gives you all kinds of possibilities to build outward on. You got, all these different studs sticking out like this. You got the cross axles up here. You got something sticking out the back. All this stuff is going to attach to, we'll find out shortly. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and I've built it up to this point. And what we've decided to do well, what I've decided to do is show you briefly that we have these long pins, and I wanted to show you how that you can see that they're used in two different manners. You can use them like this, where you have two sticking out on one side, or as we did earlier, you can have one go all the way through, where you'd have a beam's worth of pegs sticking out on each side of the beam. And this component right here just slipped in like that. That's not a big deal. And this thing right here is a pin that has a long axle part on it. You slip that over the top of it, and then this pin just snaps into there. So the next part requires us to get this axle with a stop on the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to slip that through the first part of that little pin. I call it an axle to pin connector because it's got an axle hole on one side and a pin hole on the other side. But in this case, we're going to slip the axle through it, which will allow it to spin freely. I'm going to have to probably, there we go, get that to go there. Then it slips through the gear, and then you keep pushing it until it goes to its stop, like so. Now it's in like that. And it, as I said, it'll spin through those little pin to axle connectors. So next we put that aside, and we're looking at this step right here. We're going to start building this together really quick. And you just take plain old black pin and a beam, gray beam, 5-hole beam. And then we're going to also add more gears now. Down to step 13, put this little axle pin through the gear, and then that goes through like so. So it looks like the picture, this picture here. The next step requires another gear and another smaller axle pin. Well, it's not really a pin, but I guess you could call it a small short axle, probably a 3L. Yep, it says 3 down here because I read the manual like I should have. And I shoved that through this gear here. Incidentally, these are, let me see here, I forget, 16 tooth gears, I think. We'll get into gears at another time. And they go together like so, and they mesh, and as you can see, they turn together with each other. That works out real well. But how do you keep this in? Well, the next step shows us that we add a little steering wheel to that, and now you got this steering wheel thing. Pretty slick, huh? We add this little yellow part to it. Snap that on like so. Now, actually, I got a little ahead of myself here because I wasn't supposed to shove this all the way through yet. So I pulled it right back out. Now we put this in, and then we shove it all the way through. And as you can see, that locks that together and that turns that. Take this little bushing, I don't know if you can see that, it's bushing right here. And just slide that over the axle, and what that does is that keeps the axle in place, keeps it from sliding back out, and the stop on this end keeps it from slipping that way. And so what happens is now is as you're turning this gear, or this wheel here, these gears, I'll turn this axle all the way back here. So now I'll go on to the next steps, and I will see you in a minute. Okay, next step. We are actually adding wheels to the bottom of a boat. It's kind of weird. No, this set actually requires that you put some wheels on it so that you can roll it across the floor, the table, wherever. They're actually pretty neat. all I did was just snap them on these little tan posts in the middle. These tan long pins have no friction to them, so the wheels can spin. If I were to put the same wheel on a blue peg, it wouldn't want to turn. You couldn't get it to spin. It fights because there's friction on that one. But the tan ones have no friction and are ideal for wheels or turning anything that turns. So then we put this piece on over the top of these things, these two pins here. And then I made this up ahead of time. This snaps into here like this. It's just got a beam with two blue pins on it, two long blue pins. So now we got something like that that's kind of extending out to the front of our boat. It's getting a little long here now. Now I'm going to put that aside for a second because we're going to whip up another quick little half for the other side. So the first thing it calls for is to put pins, a gray pin. This is also a frictionless variant of the black pin, and is ideal for wheels, more wheels. And then we're going to put another series of small pins in at this end here. Got a blue one, a black one, and another one of these double pin deals that have more holes on it. And then this snaps on to make the other half down here. So now our wheels are all in place. And this extends out to the front. And at this point, if I can find one, all that's required is just to take another yellow beam that's a 9 hole and just seal up the other side of that. So it looks like that. Kind of cool how that all started out just with nothing, and now it's all into the bottom of the boat so far. Next we have a section where we're switching gears a little bit and moving on to these body panel parts. I haven't really spoken much about these in my Technic tip segments yet, but they basically just go together there's pinholes, and they just snap together. They're not hard. They come in a variety of shapes and colors, and they are primarily used as structural to support the model, and as well as body panels, as I said. So I already started this one, and I'm putting pins into it right now. Like I said, you just stick pins into the pinholes, and then they just slide together like that. And then our next step, we're putting more pins into these 3 holes that stand up like this. And then this beam goes across. And if you see how this works, sometimes you got to fight them a little bit, but there you go. If you see how this works, basically that beam now locks these 2 panels from pulling apart. So now it's one solid piece, and we can turn the page and move on to the next step. And the next step in this assembly requires us to put in these 2 3/4 pins. We call it a 3/4 pin because they're not a full pin, and they're a little bit longer than a half pin. A half pin just has a stud on the end. This actually has enough on it that it can accommodate a half what do you call it, a half beam. And so anyway, you put that on like that, and as we will see later, I'm sure there will be a half beam that will probably attach to the tops of those. And then I got this last little piece which just sticks in like this. This gives us the option of having a pin that goes up and down. And now we take that assembly, pull out our boat, and it just goes right on the side. It lines up on these pins, these 4 pins here. It just snaps right on, like that. The other side is the same exact way, just in reverse. Okay, I completed both sides of the hull, and I added this piece with the sticker on it already. This piece goes across and it locks in right here and here on the pins that were part of the hull assemblies. So now they're sandwiched together on the middle, and they shouldn't pull off the sides. They're locked on. Now we're going to switch gears again for a second because we're going to do another assembly. We're starting out with this. This is kind of a yoke piece. It's got holes that go through it on the sides and some axle, I don't know, there we go. Some axle pieces. And this is very commonly used for gear assemblies, and we're going to get into a little gearing here. So I took a pin and I stuck that in there, and then we take this coupling piece, this axle coupling piece, we put a small little yellow axle on it. I think that's a probably a 3. It's a 3. And we slide it through the middle hole. Then what we do is we take this small gear, and I think this is a 12 tooth, if I'm right, and we slip that over on the side. That kind of locks that into that way. Then we take this larger gear, according to the instructions, and we put that in so that it meshes like this, and then we got to kind of hold it steady while we get this little brown pin axle to go through the bottom of it that way. And then, as you can see, now we have a little gearing mechanism that allows power to be transferred to a 90-degree angle. But we're not done yet. There's also this piece that needs to get put on here, and that probably is good indication of where that's going to be held on. And then I went ahead and I took the liberty of making up this little assembly. It's just a couple of beams with some pins holding it all together. And so then I add that into here, right over this brown axle. Once I line it up, you slip it up until it goes all the way in. And there it goes. And then what we have here now is something that's starting to look like a little bit of a rudder. Let's see here, I can get that in focus a little better. And then bring our boat back over. This is going to slide onto the end. The coupler is going to go into the end of this shaft. And while that's doing that, this part down here is lining up with this red piece here. So that's going to slip into that. So we got 2 things that we have to line it up with and get it in together. And part of my problem is the top coupler needs to line up with the cross. There we go. And now we're business. Now once that lines up like that, this black piece lines up with these, and all of a sudden, guess what? You shove them in, and now it's locked into position. And now what we have here is really cool because you can turn the wheel, and now the rudder will turn. Isn't that nifty? Okay, now moving on, we have a new assembly that we put together. I kind of went ahead and got started with this. There's no real magic here. There's just a lot of beams that are just put together with various pins to hold them in place. I just followed the instructions and put it together verbatim, so it's nothing really, like I said, special here, just beams and pins. And then I got to this point, and I built this thing. And once again, it's a beam with some pins in it. It's got one of these axles with the stop on the end. This is a little 8-tooth gear that just slipped right on the end. And this is like some kind of a spool piece. So the spool goes on there, and then the gear sits on top. And then this snaps onto there like so. And then I built this assembly, same thing, just some beams and pins. Followed the instructions, and that snaps onto here like that. And then I have two of these things. One I already built, looks like that, goes there. It's made from these three pieces here. Whoa, a toe ball pin, one of these right angle axle pins with a hole in the middle, and then this one of these what I call pin to axle connectors. This one has two holes on it, and what we'll do is we just put the right angle connector in, and the toe ball in one of the holes like that, and then these both go on the assembly like so. Okay, so we have our assembly, and I went ahead and I got started doing a few other things. I added a couple of pins down here that was required, and then I went ahead and I put one of these other spools on the side with another axle. I have to do the same thing to this side. Just stick the axle on up, stick the spool over the top of that until it's in place. It's one of those axles that has the smooth, flat thing, so it stops at the bottom, so it's not going to pull through. And then what we do is we have these, believe it or not, LEGO rubber bands. LEGO actually makes rubber bands. And we are going to take these rubber bands and we are going to connect them in a series like this, where both of them are wrapped around the center, and one goes to one side, one goes to the other side, just like that. Then we'll get started on the next part of the assembly. Okay, so we start our next part of the assembly, and I went ahead and got started. I put one of these axle pieces in, and I used a bushing to hold it in place. And I'm going to do the same thing. I have this gear also on this axle piece, also with the flat end, and that can go in the middle. It just slips right in the middle hole, as you can see. And then you slide this axle through, and we will take this bushing and we will put that on. Bushings are great because they can either hold a pin in place, keep it from slipping, locks it in, or it acts as a spacer, and in this case it kind of does both, because we're going to put this piece over the top. And actually, before I jump ahead, let's go ahead and put this little half bush. This is a half bush. This goes on the other side to hold the gear in, so that the gear is nice and stable and not wobbling around so much. So then we slip this half beam over the holes over this way, and then we are going to add two more half bushes to that to hold that down. And if you notice, you take a half beam and a half push, and now you're a full beam width wide. It's just as wide as a regular beam. So there's your half and half. Then we just add these two little tiny beams on. They each have an axle hole and a standard pin hole, so that gives you a little bit of freedom to do some things with those. Then we turn it and stand it this way, and we are going to now add it to this assembly. We're going to slip this hole here over the top of this here, and these 2 feet that we just put on are going to line up on those 2 blue pins. And it should just go right on. And then the key also is, as I can see now, is that you got to make sure that the gears mesh so that it slides down. And once that happens, then gears should line up. Okay, and there you go. Then we have this other little beam right here that's just going to go on the top. And so like that. Actually, I put it on backwards. There we go. Proper. And we bring our boat back over, and now we got these 4 peg holes and 4 pegs in these 4 peg holes down below, so they're just going to go ahead and snap right in. Set up the wheel in the middle, get those to all line up, and it just drops right on, just like that. And then to finish this off, there's 2 little cranks. One I made up, and they just go on the tops of the spools on each side. It's just a beam, a little tiny cylinder, I guess you would call it, and then it's a gray frictionless pin, so it has some spinny, and then that just goes right on the axle. And now you can use the cranks to make this turn, and there's one on each side, just like a real sailboat. Okay, so the next step is I went ahead and I made up this little assembly. This is really, once again, nothing special, just some pins, some beams. This actually up front here is 2 half beams that have been put together and held together with an axle and an axle pin. Actually, there's a pin on the other side of that. And this snaps on to the front of the boat, and this becomes our bow. And then we take this piece. Oops, I think I got the wrong piece. Take this piece, this one that's shorter, and that goes on like that. Next, start this assembly right here. I went ahead and put this together so far. And what that is comprised of is one on the other side. You got another one of these little round cylinders and another one of these axles with the flat. Stick that on. Slide it through this little 3-hole beam. And then we got these nice little variation of a pin to axle connector. And that goes on like that. Just enough to get it on, but not all the way through. It will go through, but not yet. So now that we got that done, we get this piece, this beam, and I went ahead and already threw the 2 3/4 pins into it, and that goes into the center of these pin to axle connectors. Now you push it all the way through, and you can do that for both sides. And you push that until you can't push them anymore, and you end up with something like this. And then those both fold up this way. And finally, I'm going to put these in like this. These pins are great because they're double long. You can use them to hold two pieces together. It also has this nice convenient end that also you can accept an axle or an axle pin of some kind. So they're very versatile pin, very serious component to any LEGO Technic build. And then we also have these pin to axle connectors, just simple ones. They turn at a right angle, and they just they go on like this. I'm doing it backwards. They go onto the ends of these axles sticking out like this, and then they both get a standard pin. And then we'll put that aside and we'll start working on the next part of the bow. Okay, next I went ahead and I built both sides of the bow. Once again, it's just a couple of body parts held together with some pins and a beam that locks them together. And we just put a little connector and a pin on the end of that. And both sides have basically the same thing, just opposites. And I put stickers all on, so they're all ready to go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that assembly that we just finished making earlier, and we're going to turn around and we're going to flip it like this, set it up so that it looks this way. Then this black pin on the bottom is going to go into this hole on the yellow piece and snap in. When that happens, these two orange pins are able to slide in and lock into the front of the blue, if you can see that there. Then we take the same thing and do the same thing to the other side. Starting out with the, if I can hold it straight, put the pin on the side, and then sliding in the orange pins. And that's the beginning of our bow. That'll allow us to put them together at an angle. So now with our bow ready to go, we're going to turn around and we're going to bring our boat back over. It's kind of hard to get it all in one shot, but here we're just going to put the bow on the front, and this just slides right down over the top. And the big thing to pay attention to is that these need to line up, and then the blue pin, the blue long pin on top, should go slip down into the connector below, and do that to both sides. And that's the beginning of our bow being locked into place. The next step is to take these half plates or half beams, and those are going to slip right over the top of the blue pin and those 3/4 pins that we talked about earlier. We said that there was probably going to be a half beam that went on top of those. So that helps lock that in. So now the bow is fairly locked into place. To finish this up, we slide this pin in here, and that goes across like that, and then this goes like that, and this goes like that. Okay, so now we're going to take the bow of our boat and we're going to start working on a little bit more structure, a little bit more body. And I went ahead and made this little deal up. Now this thing's got a pinhole offset that's raised so it can actually fit over another beam, and then it's got axle holes that allow it. And how that's going to go into play is this is going to sit on top of this gray beam right here, and this pin is going to go right through. And now, as you see, we have a pinhole here set up, we have axle holes ready to go, and that's how that works. Then I took this assembly that was already lined out in the instructions on how to put it together, which is simply 2 beams and a bunch of pins, and that snaps onto this front part here. And once you get that on, that just drops right on down like that. And then when that happens, these pins can now get pushed into place, which lock it in. Take another little small red axle, and that can go through here, and that locks that in here, back up here. Then I took the liberty of making up this assembly. It's just another couple of connectors held together by a pin, and that goes here. It's the front of our mast, or I don't know if you'd call it the mast, but the jib. And then another beam comes up and seals the deal, just like that. Okay, moving on. I took the liberty of putting a few more parts on. I have these beams added on, some more pins added on, added another beam up here. And then I added in the navigational lights, the green for the starboard and the red for the port side. Those help other boats see which direction this boat would be traveling. That way, if they see a red light, they know that stop, because this boat is heading in one direction, versus if they see the green light, they know it's going in the other direction. And this boat would have to stop, if they see the same lights on the other boats. So anyways, back to the build. I got these body parts, and so we're going to snap one of them on, like that. Then we're going to start our mast. So here's the first part of that, and that just slips over these like so. This gray piece comes along and locks it in, same, just like it does on the other side. And then this body part covers the whole thing up. There we go. And now we got our mast too started. Okay, now to add some further rigidity to our bow, we are going to turn around and build 2 of these. I went ahead and built the first one, just a couple half beams that are put together with pins. And that just snaps on like that, and over the top of that. And then I have, like I said, the 2 half beams right here, and the pins just hold them together like that. And we snap it on like that. Then I already put the stickers on the little dashboards. There's this little assembly that goes together that holds that on, and that thing snaps in like that. And that comes down. And basically what that is just one of these little yellow pieces with blue axle pin in it, and then another red axle. This is one of those pin to axle connectors. Good example here. You got an axle and a pin together, and they just go together like that, and then the whole thing attaches to the little door or whatever it is, the little door piece, little body part. and that part will snap into the and then you have that. They just fold right down. Okay, now we're going to start another assembly. I went ahead and put some pins in a beam, and this is going to be the I don't know what it's called, but it's the part that comes off the mast that holds the bottom of the sail. And I went ahead and I made this assembly. This is just this yellow axle, and it's got a couple of connector pieces on the ends, just snapped right on these pins. And then it's got this one that slides in the middle with a frictionless pin down below. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take two of these, which I made up already. One, they're just right angle axle with a connector pin, and those are going to go on like so, here and there. And then down here on this pin, we're going to put in two more of these parts that we already looked at before, and they go on like this, and then each one of them is going to get a red axle, but not pushed all the way through, so they look like that. Then we bring our boat over, and what's going to happen is two things. One, we need to get this to slip over, which is sometimes not always easy if we have to kind of manipulate the pins. There we go. And then while we're doing that, we want to be able to, I don't know if you can see this, we want to get this frictionless pin into this corner of this gray arm. So if I do that first, and now I got those lined up, now these should push right in. There and there. Now, for fun, if you turn the crank, it makes the sail go back and forth. Pretty sweet, huh? So now I went ahead and I made up this little part. This is going to be the mast, and I went ahead and I made this little doodad up. This is like a Technic ball on one of those right angle axle things, and then it's got a half pin going through the hole with holding on this little clear tile. It's supposed to represent a light, and I guess the ball would be like some kind of radar or something, and that just goes in like that. And then I had to make two of these little deals up with a pin and a tow ball pinned to axle connector again, and one goes in the top of that like there, and it moves, flops around, it's loose. That's the way it's intended. That's because it's a frictionless pin. And then we put another one in down below here. And then this whole thing gets to go. I'm going to probably have to raise my camera some. This thing is going to attach onto here, this. You can see that goes on that there. Okay, some of the last stuff we need to do, trying to get a shot in here, is to put the front of the sail or the mast, and I put this together. This is axles and connectors and some tow balls stuck in the middles, and that just goes on the into the front and leans right back up against there. I have this beam needs to go in and lock this together like you see there, and then at the top, to hold this on, we just slip that hole from this piece on over that axle, shove that red pin in there. I don't know if you can see that. And that's how that looks. Then all that's left is just to put sails on. Got sails right here. And here's our boat now with the sails put on. They just went right over the tow balls, pretty much the way the instructions tell it to do. This thing functions the way we already have shown, that if you turn the wheel, then the rudder goes, and then if you turn these little cranks to the side, then the sails turn. I hope that this was an informative build, not just a fun build, but a chance for you guys out there to see maybe something about how Technic components work and go together, and maybe that might help you come up with a design of your own. Thank you for listening.